Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming out tonight, and thanks to Facebook and Parse. This is really fantastic hosting. Let's have a round of applause for them. Thank you. And Ashley Smith. I haven't seen Ashley or Courtney Whitmer. Are you guys here? Okay, Courtney, hi. It's good to meet you. We've been exchanging email. We haven't met yet. So Ashley and I were talking about doing this before Parse was part of Facebook, and it's great to be able to come here. I hope everybody made it safely through the traffic and didn't have any issues with the paperwork and stuff to get in. It's really great, really comfortable, good setting, a great time to hear some in-depth, to take an in-depth look at Parse and some new things that Parse have. And then to hear, so we're going to hear two presentations from Parse. First, kind of a core what is Parse presentation from Matt Gamache-Osselen. And then James Yu, one of the Parse co-founders, is going to talk about Parse hosting, which is pretty interesting. If you don't already have a place where you're putting your websites, or if you don't like the one that you do have, I think he's got an answer for you. And then we're going to hear from Matt at ShowKit, who was at our meetup last month. They're going to show us some more depth on how you can use ShowKit in your apps. So thanks again. That's all I have to say. So Matt, are you ready?
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Tim. Cool. Well, hello, everyone. I'm Matt. I'm a software engineer at Parse. And what I want to do is basically give you guys a quick rundown of what Parse is, what kind of features we offer, and why it's really awesome if you're writing iOS apps. So for all of you, I'm sure who have written iOS apps, you know that's really hard, right? Especially these days when like a fart app just doesn't cut it anymore. And like, users, they want this complicated server side. They don't know it's a server side, but they expect something meaty in your app. They want the state to be stored. They want to be able to log in on another device, on their iPads maybe. And all that adds a lot of complexities to your apps. So what does a typical app look like? Well, you start with some kind of database, Mongo, MySQL, whatever. And then on top of that, you need some kind of REST API, or some kind of API at least, because your client has to talk to your backend somehow. And then on top of that, you need some kind of server. This is where your business logic will go. We'll do stuff like users, security, etc. And that basically completes your backend. Now, even on the client side, though, there's a lot of difficult things to do, like networking. I'm sure if any of you have used networking stack in iOS, it's not the easiest to use. There's some cool libraries, but it's pretty difficult to use. And then you end up with the problem of caching, right? If I open my app, I don't want to see a blank screen. I want to see data. And finally, you get to the cool part, which is basically what you guys want to do, right? You want to write a cool app. You want to bring your idea to life. So Parse tries to eliminate these first 5 things and really let you focus on creating your app and doing what app developers do best, which is create an amazing user experience, create those cool, innovative controls, implementing an amazing design, and delighting your users. So how does Parse do this? Well, we have an SDK that you just drop into your app, and it will basically give you all this stuff for free. And today we'll talk about the iOS SDK. We have a bunch of other SDKs if you want to do some kind of cross-platform app. If you even like, a more web approach, you can use stuff like, I always forget the name, all these JavaScript frameworks out there. If you want to do Windows 8 app too, you can do that. And through this SDK, we give you all this functionality. So let's take a look at how. So let's pick an app. Some app that's very complicated, has a really difficult backend in there somewhere. Something like Instagram. So Instagram has users, right? You can log in. But it's not just any kind of users. It's special kind of users where you can even log in using Facebook or Twitter. And you can click that log in with Facebook button. And on top of those, you have data that you can store. Things like comments, things like likes. These different data that you store can have locations associated to them, right? I can say I took this from the iOS conference in Menlo Park. Of course, there's pictures. That's the core of Instagram. You can store all these awesome images with your filters. Then after I've stored all this data and created all of it, I can fetch it back and show it in a timeline of some sort. I can follow other people, and that's what will define what shows up in my timeline. And finally, there's push notifications. That's great for keeping your users engaged, because when you see on Instagram, oh, James, you liked my photo, I want to go check out which photo that was. So let's start by users. How does users work? Well, users is probably one of the most rewritten piece of code in the history of mankind. Like every single app has users, and it's always the same. And I'm sure you've all written at least once, and it's never fun. It's pretty boring and pretty dull and pretty repetitive. So Parse tries to make this as easy as possible. You can write no server code. All you'll do is these 4 lines of code in your app somewhere. You'll say new user, set a username, set a password, called sign up. That's really all there is to it. That creates a new user in your database, stored on Parse, handles all the caching, all the session management, stores all the security around that, doing the network request, basically everything. And of course, you want to do more than just sign up. At some point, your user will probably want to log in. So for that, just one method call, log in with username, you set the password, set the username, and then that's it. We handle everything else. And basically, at any point in your app, you have access to who's currently logged in. That's using the current user singleton. So at any point, you can say, is there a current user? Is this nil or not? And if it's not nil, then just skip the login screen, for example. And if it is nil, then you'll show that first login screen before you show the main view. So that's users. Pretty simple, right? But we said that Instagram doesn't just have users. They have this special kind of users special kind of users using Facebook and Twitter. So how do we do that using Parse? Well, we try to make it as simple as possible again. So you'll just drop in the Facebook SDK if you want to use Facebook. For Twitter, I believe there's an SDK as well you'll have to drop in. And you can either log in or link a user to a Facebook account. So the first one is linking. If the user's already logged in, you'll just call this function, specify the user, and that will kick off the entire permissions flow where you'll see that dialog, you'll switch to the Facebook app, and handle all of that. If you want to log in a new user, that will basically sign them up or log them in using Facebook, and we'll create the user if necessary. And you basically have the exact same methods in Twitter. So that's simple. Now what about storing data? We're talking about comments and likes and all this arbitrary data that you want to store. So for that, we have this thing called a PF object. So we saw the PF user, we stored a username and a password, right? So a PF object is basically just a more generalized version of that. And in fact, a PF user is a subclass of a PF object. So on a user, you can also store arbitrary data. So how this works is I'll specify the class name, in this case, comment. So that'll be the name of my table in my database. So later, as we'll see, you'll have a new table as soon as you run this code in your database called comments. So on this, I can store basically key value pairs. Any kind of data I want to store on Parse, I simply specify it. So I'll say set object, grade pick, just a string. And I'll set that for the key text. So in my database, I'll have a column called text, and the text will be grade pick. I can store other things. I can even store user. So here I'm storing the current user for the user field. So I'll have a link store to which user posted this. And then when I'm ready, I simply call save in background. And in my database, it'll look like this. You have a new row, a new table, and you have the text here saying grade pick. And the cool thing is here, you don't have to run a migration. We're completely built on MongoDB, which is a NoSQL database. And that allows you to just run this piece of code, and that gets created automatically for you. You don't have to worry about migrating your data, creating new columns with migrations, all that annoying stuff. Just magically gets created. So now what about locations? We said that Instagram can attach a location as metadata to some stuff. Well, one way to do this would be to simply store the latitude and the longitude of your comment along with that first data we just saw, just 2 numbers, pretty simple. But Parse wants to make this easier because when you later want to query based on this geolocation data, it can actually be pretty complicated to do, all the comments that were made 2 miles from this exact location. So we make this easier with the PF geopoint data type. So here we have that same comment, and if we focus in on those 2 lines in the middle, we're creating a new object of type geopoint. And this is not some kind of subclass of PF object. It's really just a tiny, thin wrapper around a latitude and a longitude. So here we're setting those 2 points, and we're setting that for the value of a key, in this case, location. And all that will do is that later, when you save it, you'll have a new column called location that will be storing that geopoint. So when you want to query this data, you'll be able to say things like, all the comments that are in San Francisco, and you'll get that one back. So now what about pictures? That's really the core of Instagram, right? How do you store binary data, basically? Well, it's actually very similar to what we just saw with GeoPoints. You have a special data type that will allow you to store this kind of binary data. So here I'm creating a new PF object called pictures. And I'm giving it the class name picture. So I'll have a new table in my database. I'm setting the key Seoul Nightlife, not sure why, for the key title. And so I'll have the column title and that text. And now if we focus in on those 4 lines in the middle, that's where it gets interesting. So I basically had the NS data for that image. And with it, I create a PF file. So again, that's very similar to a PF GeoPoint. It's not any kind of subclass of a PF object. It's really just a thin wrapper around data. And if you look at the last line, I'm just setting this PF file as the object for a key, in this case, the key image. And then at the end, I'm just saving my picture. But if you notice, I actually have 2 save in backgrounds in there. The last one is a little pale, but it's right here. But I'm actually saving the image file itself. That's completely optional, and you don't have to do this. Parse will take care of saving the image for you. But what you can do with this is, much like Instagram does, as soon as you take your picture, you start uploading it. And then as the user types in their text, any kind of metadata they want, their sharing options, you're uploading that picture. So as soon as he says, OK, post, you don't have to wait for 45 seconds. You've already waited for 35, so you only have 10 seconds to wait left. So this helps you kind of not have to worry about how to queue those up, but just save the file, save the PF object when you're ready, and the Parse SDK will take care of all this complicated queuing in the background for you. So you don't even have to think about it. So that's basically how you'll store images. And here we'll see I have a new class called pictures, and I have an image column here with a link to that exact image. I can actually click on that, and I would see the cool image. So I've been showing you these kind of little snippets of what your database would look like. And what that is a snippet of our data browser. So we have this cool tool online that you can use to view all of your data. So here it is. And you can search through your data. We have this really cool filtering option. And you can search for basically exactly the data you want. It's great for performing analysis, debugging your code, seeing how much traffic your app is getting, how many users you have, cool stuff like that. And of course, at any point, you can export all of this, do any kind of analysis you want locally. So now back to our Instagram breakdown, we saw users, that was with PF users, right? We saw Facebook and Twitter, that was using the PF Facebook utils and PF Twitter utils. We had those login and linking functions. We saw comments and likes. Those are just PF objects, and you just store arbitrary data. It's just an NS dictionary, basically. We saw locations using PF GeoPoints. We saw pictures using PF files with a really cool thing where you can save the picture before the object is finished saving. And now we're up to displaying data. We created all this cool data. How do we get it back? Well, much like you would do in a regular database situation, you'll perform queries. What's cool is that you can perform these queries completely client-side again. So what does that look like? Well, you'll create a PF query, and you'll specify which class you want to query. So in this case, we're querying for pictures. And here, let's say we want all the current users' pictures that were taken in the last week. What I'll do is I'll add a set of constraints. These constraints can be very complicated or very simple, but you can target exactly the subset of data that you want, and you'll get it back locally. So here I'm saying where the key user is equal to the current user. So I'm getting the current user's pictures. Then I'm saying where the created at date is greater than, I'm just giving the date of a week ago. You'd have to use this long, arbitrary method name in Objective-C. And then you say find objects in background, and it's that simple. You'll get all these objects back. Now, if you notice here, I have a block at the end. And I've had quite a few of these in the past, a couple slides, and I always had dot, dot, dot. And I want to kind of show you guys what this looks like. Because blocks in Objective-C are this great way to do asynchronous code, where instead of having a delegate and having another function somewhere, blah, 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 you just have all this code in line. And in this case, as soon as the objects come back, you just have all the code that's going to be run. So if you look, you have a fairly strange syntax, but you have an NS array of all the objects that are the result set. And you have an error if one happened. And you can do whatever you want here. Usually you'll probably put those in a table view somehow and display them to the user. And there's one more cool thing you can do with queries, and that's setting the cache policy. What that means is that, let's say the user is offline, and he looks at your app. What should happen? Well, if you set the caching policy to one of our options, which is cache then network, that means that the first thing that query will do is that it will query the local cache instead of going to the server. So it'll query the cache locally, and that will return some kind of stale old data that the user queried previously, and that's okay. And you'll show those in the table view, and the user will be able to play around and look at that. He won't look at a blank screen. And then Parse will try and reach the network, so get an updated set of data. And if there's no network available, then that will just fail, and you can show an error saying the network is not available. And that's okay, but at least the user will see something, and he can look over the old data, and maybe he was just looking for an old message anyway. And there's a bunch of different options for exactly your use case. You can do cache else network, cache only, network only, and so on. So we talked about querying. Now what about the follow relationship? So that's where we get into relations. Now in a typical database situation, you would have foreign keys, primary keys. You just kind of all manage that manually. And then in your queries as well, you will do your joins and have all that fun. So Parse tries to make this a bit easier by allowing you to do kind of abstract away all this foreign key and primary key stuff. So first of all is one-to-many relationships. How would we do that in Parse? Well, we've actually already done a few of these, and it's really, really simple. You should simply create a PF object, and to create a relation to another PF object, you just set it as the key, as the value for a key. So here, we're tying a user to a comment by saying set object PF user current user for the key user. If I wanted to tie a comment to a post, I'd do the exact same thing. I would say set object some post object for the key post. And it's that easy. For many-to-many relationships, though, it becomes a bit more complicated. So an example of a many-to-many is relations, or following relations, right? Because one user can follow a lot of different users, but all these users can be followed by a lot of different users. So you have this very complicated set of data. And in a typical database, you'll create a join table, right? So you'll have one column of primary keys, another column of primary keys, and then you'll do a query that joins user and user together. For Parse, we try to make this a bit easier. And you can definitely do that if you want. You can do your own join tables. But we try to make this easier with PF relations. So that happens by, here I'm just getting the current user. And here I'm creating a relation, or a PF relation. And what I can do is store all the data I want in this relation, and that will basically create the join table for you. So if you look here, I'm saying create a new PF relation for the user with the key following. So now I'll have a new column called following on my user, and I can start storing data in there. So I'll just say add an object, new friend, an object, another friend, and then when I'm ready, I'll just say save. And of course, anybody can follow these two friends. I can have someone else following these two guys. I can have 100 people following these two guys, and it'll all just work. So that's relations. The last piece of our Instagram puzzle was push notifications. So how do I send pushes? I don't know how many of you, actually, how many of you have set up push in iOS? Did you guys enjoy the process? It's a very, very difficult process. I don't know why they made it so hard, but it's really annoyingly difficult. Then there's a part of that that nobody can help except Apple, and that's just setting up all your certificates, your developer accounts, all those things. And then there's the actually sending part. It's actually quite difficult as well. You need to set up a server, you need some kind of queuing system, and you need to send those out one by one. So at Parse, we tried to simplify the sending process and to avoid having you have to build this entire queuing system, scale that as your app grows, basically do what Parse does, which is try and replace servers. And we have two methods of sending pushes. Both are equally interesting, but one is much more powerful, but a bit harder to use. So let's take a look. First, we have channels. That's our older model, and it works great if you have kind of a simplistic model. You just specify a channel, in this case, mobile DevCon, and then you say, send a push to all the people that subscribe to this channel. And all the apps that want to subscribe to it, simply call that first line. So very simple. If you don't want to get messages for that channel anymore, you call unsubscribe. What's really cool is pushing to queries. So Parse will basically create a table for you in your database called an installation. And that represents a device that has your app installed on it. So everybody that has your app installed will show up in this table. And what you can do is store arbitrary data you want on this object. It's really just a subclass of the PF object. So here I'm actually storing a link or a relation to the current user on this PF installation. So that way I'll know who the user that owns each of my installations are. And then I can later do a query for, let's say, all the users that are within this conference room. And then using that, I can send them all a push notification. So I can say, as long as I'm storing the location of the user in the user class. So with this, just this simple query, I can send a push to a query, which is a query for all the installations, and then send them a message. And that's really powerful because the segment that this is reaching can be continually changing. It doesn't have to be set like a channel is. So you can do some really, really cool stuff with this. And so back to my Instagram breakdown, we saw displaying the data that was using PF queries. We saw the follow relation that was using relations and PF relations more specifically. And then we saw push notifications, whether it is to a channel or to a query using installations. So now, this pretty much covers all the functionality Instagram has. But I'm sure you're thinking that's not really true, right? This is pretty broad overview of what Instagram does. And I'm sure you're thinking that those servers Instagram have aren't just sitting there doing nothing. And that's very true. There's some stuff that just doesn't belong on the client, whether that's things like validations, authentication, stuff like, let's say I want the average number of likes a photo has. Do I have to download all the photos on my device? It's pretty crazy. So to fix that issue, Parse created Cloud Code. Cloud Code is this really, really cool service that allows you to run JavaScript server-side code on our servers. So again, we try to make you not have to run your own servers and maintain them and scale them up. We want to do that for you. So we do that by offering you our JavaScript SDK on our servers. So you'll write basically what looks like client-side code and what feels very familiar because it's the exact same API that we just saw with iOS, but it's all server-side, and it's run at a higher level of authentication. So what does that look like? Well, the first part is just writing arbitrary functions. So here, the average likes example I gave would be just this. So here you can see I'm creating a query for all the current users' photos. And if you notice here, I actually have the user session in this function. And I'm looking for all those photos. I'm saying query.find. When I get the results back, I simply loop over all of them, calculate the number, and I return just that one number down to the client instead of the entire set of photos, which would be pretty ridiculous. But that's not all. I mean, writing arbitrary functions is pretty powerful. It's a great way to, start not having to have servers. But one other key part is hooks. So what if I want to make sure that every post that is saved is always shorter than 140 characters? Well, I can use a before save hook. So here I'm specifying it's a before save and saying what class I want to run this before every single object is saved. And then I simply check if the length is bigger than 140 characters. If it is, I could simply reject it. In this case, I'm just truncating it and adding 3 dots. And it's that simple. Now, one thing that's missing is how do I send an email? How do I process a payment? How do I send a text message? How do I do all these other random things that Parse doesn't take care of, but all these amazing companies do? Well, that's where you get external HTTP requests. And whether you want to talk to your own server, you can just use an HTTP request to any server you want in the world, or you can use one of our pre-made modules to integrate with one of the really cool third parties that we've partnered with, like Twilio, like Crowdflower, like Mandrill, Mailgun, Stripe. And all these partners offer these really awesome services that we don't, and that usually fit great in a mobile app context. So now there's one more key part that you might need a server for. So when you create your app, you might need a landing page, right? You might need a website with your app. So how do you do that? Well, Parse just released this really cool feature called Parse Hosting, and James is going to take over and explain to you how awesome that feature is.
Cool, thanks, Matt. So I'm James. I'm one of the co-founders of Parse. I'm here to talk to you about Parse Hosting today. Can you give me just show of hands? How many people have actually set up their own production server? Okay, so it looks like there's some server knowledge here. Usually it's a pain in the ass. What the good thing is that you don't need to know anything about servers to use our hosting solution. So this will be a very pragmatic overview. I'll focus basically on getting you guys ready to just build a simple website or a web app for your mobile app. So I'll give a quick overview, kind of our philosophy and the design of Parse Hosting. Then I'll talk about static hosting. And then dynamic hosting, where you can create basically complicated web apps. And then I'll end with a quick live example where I'll create a landing page for your mobile app. So when we first started Parse, it's basically a mobile-first platform. What does that actually mean? It means that you're working with native objects. So just like how Matt explained, when you're working on iOS SDK, you're basically touching only client-side code. Another way I like to think about this is that you don't even need to know what a URL is to use Parse. Think about that. You don't need to know RESTful interfaces. You don't need to know how to specify endpoints or stand up a server. And this is similar to Instagram, actually. So when Instagram was acquired by Facebook, they didn't really have a web presence. They had just a front page, couldn't really do much with it. Only later did they actually release that. And we knew that one day we would also release a web hosting solution. But what would that look like? This is what we asked ourselves. We really wanted it to be really simple to use, and you still didn't need to know what a web server was. So we sort of looked at all the web frameworks that are out there today. And there's a spectrum. So when web developers first touch with the web, usually it's PHP. You have some kind of shared hosting environment. You throw up a PHP file in Apache. It just works. It could be a static file. You have a little bit of PHP encode in there. You FTP it up there. It's great. Put it in a shared hosting environment, and your website is live. Could have some basic functionality. We really like that sort of immediate intuitiveness. And on the other end of the spectrum is our frameworks like Rails, or even Cake PHP, other MVC frameworks. These frameworks give you a little bit more structure, but there's a lot more things you have to learn. But if you play by the rules, you'll be able to build really complicated applications quickly. But to get up a Rails server, you have to figure out, am I going to use Unicorn in front of it? I got to monitor my Ruby processes. This is a little bit more overhead. What we want to do is strike kind of a balance in between. That's what parse hosting is. So I'll just dive in and talk a little bit more about how that actually works. So first up is static hosting. And this is sort of what you would expect. You just choose basically a subdomain, and it'll appear at parseapp.com, or you can have your own custom domain and point your DNS over to us. You initialize the parse directory on your computer with a parse command line interface. Then you just create some arbitrary files in your public directory. Then it's simply one keyword, just deploy all that, and your website's live. So pretty intuitive, a lot like FTP, what you would come to expect. So that's static hosting. But a lot of times you actually want to return dynamic content. You want to return content that is based on some state in your application or some state in your parse data. And for that, we have dynamic hosting. Now, when we first looked at this, we thought, well, dynamic hosting, we don't want this to be sort of different from the kind of paradigm that we've made thus far. Therefore, we integrate with Cloud Code. But we had to choose some kind of framework to allow you guys to create web apps in a sustainable manner. So we chose Express.js. So Express.js is a web framework built on top of Node. And it's all in JavaScript. What we basically did was repurpose that to work in Cloud Code. And we married that with the JavaScript SDK, so you can get access to the same data that your mobile app has access to from Parse, whether that's an iOS app or an Android app or anything. The other good thing about Express is that I feel like it is a framework that strikes kind of a good balance between the PHP and Rails analogy. Simple, but it can give you enough structure later on to build more complicated applications and to be able to collaborate with many people on one web app. So what does the directory structure look like? If you guys are familiar with Cloud Code, basically you'll know that there's a cloud directory, and main.js is where your Cloud Code goes. And that's sort of your after-save hooks on your parse objects, maybe some cloud functions. Well, our recommendation is that you create another file called app.js, include it in main, and that's where your Express code lives. So this is your main web app. And you have some view templates that your web app can access in views. Then under the main public directory is all the static files. That could be your HTML files, it could be a CSS, images, just arbitrary binary content that you want to send down to the browser, and is also deployed with your cloud code. So let's start with hello world. So app.js, basically you have this special app object. And from there you can specify endpoints to return arbitrary web content. In this case, we're saying we want a GET request going to the root, which is just /, to return hello world. As you can see, the second value to this the second content is just a function that will take a request and a response. And this is called a middleware function. Basically, you can take things from the request and use the response to send down data to the pipe. In this case, we just send hello world. But that's just one piece of text, right? Usually, you actually want to send a little bit more to the browser than just hello world. You want to send a whole HTML document. In this case, you can actually render a template instead. In this case, we render hello, and here's what the template looks like. It's hello.ejs. So EJS stands for Evaluative JavaScript. If you guys are familiar with ERB in Rails or other templating languages, it's similar to that, except that you can put arbitrary JavaScript in there. In this case, it's just a static piece of HTML. Well, usually you want it to be more dynamic, right? Well, we can pass down JSON into this template. In this case, we pass down a message, and we say hi. And in the template itself, we can interpolate any arbitrary JavaScript. In this case, it's very similar to ERB. It's actually identical. You would interpolate the message value that we put down into the actual template. Of course, we can also pass down data from the request itself. In this case, we can look at the query that is coming in and look at the value for hi in this GET query. So in this case, that hi would get passed through this function and down to the template. So using these various aspects, I mean, there's a lot more to express than just this. But using these components, we can build a pretty simple application. In this case, let's build a landing page. So let's go to that. Can you guys hear me? Hello? Okay, great. Let's see. So let's first go to Parse. Wow, this is really, let me maybe make this play a little bit saner. Hold on. Let's try 60 hertz. Too big. This one? Okay.
Give it a second. There we go.
Okay, that's better. She looks different on mine. Okay, great. So let's first create our Parse app. Let's call it landing page. And the idea here is that, let's say you're launching an Instagram clone in about a month. And what you usually want to do is you want to drum up some interest beforehand. So you want to create basically a landing page, shows a little bit about your value prop, and allows people to sign up via their email address. Then you have this email list, and later on, you want to send out emails to that email list. Pretty simple, but it's a very common kind of use case. So I just set up a Parse app. Go to data browser real quick. And as you can see, there's nothing in there yet, of course. This low. And what I'll go here is I'll go into the web hosting section, and now specify my subdomain. We'll do landing page. Looks like it's not taken. Good. Then I go to my terminal. So I have an empty directory here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use the parse command line interface, which is a binary that we download. I'm going to new up a new cloud code directory. What I'll do is sign in with my Parse credentials real quick. And as you can see, it basically made a whole bunch of files for me. I'm going to pick the app I just made, which I called landing page. And as you can see, it creates a bunch of different directories for me, similar to basically the directory structure I showed you earlier. Now let's jump into some of these files and take a quick look. Yeah, landing, parse. Let's go to a public directory. So we automatically generated a hello world index.html. So that looks good. Let's deploy that real quick. So just hit parse deploy. And we'll go in here, landing page. So I specified landing page.parseapp.com. Great, hello world. Not too exciting. Let's make sure it actually works. So let's change up the template real quick, save it, and then deploy. Okay, so that's static hosting. It's just basically files there, you can deploy it. So basically we called up our designer and basically got a landing page. And let's say he gives us some static files and we open it. Great, so this is just basically a landing page, just shows some of the value props of your app, in this case AnyPic, which is your Instagram clone. And our target is basically to create a form here where users will be able to enter their email address. But first, let's get this landing page onto Parse. So I'm going to copy this over, go to my landing project, and I'll overwrite this. OK, overwritten, and then we'll deploy. Take a few seconds because there's some large images there. Come on, internet. OK, great. Let's close this, and then we refresh this page. Basically, that template's live now. So let's now go into, but this is not exactly what we want, right? So we want to be able to dynamically generate this content and then show a form here. So let's work on that. So what I'm going to do is use parse generate express, and this will generate an express app for me. Now let's go take a look at those new files that dropped. Close this. So inside cloud, we have main.js, which has basically some cloud functions in there. Not really going to use them today. But we go to app.js. This is our main Express app. So there's a lot of boilerplate code here. This sets up basically Express for you, sets up your app object, specifies some view directories, but you basically don't have to change that stuff. The meat of it is actually here. So we set up a dummy endpoint for you called hello. And this would just render a template called hello under views. Let's take a look at that real quick. And basically similar to our previous template. One thing to note is that we do need to actually make sure we require this code inside of main.js, because that is the main entry point for your cloud code. So I'm going to do that real quick. So we should all be set up for this dummy endpoint. Let's test to make sure that actually works. Uploading the source file. It's actually pretty bothersome that I'm deploying all the time. There's a cool mode that we have, which is called parse develop. And what this will do is that it will, you can specify the actual app, but it will actually look at all the files that you're changing and automatically upload them as you develop. It's a nice handy little thing, mode you can put it in. OK, so we deployed our hello endpoint. Let's go take a look at it. Hello world. So this is just, now this is actually a dynamic template. It's reading from an EJS file, going through Express and down to the browser. Now what we want to do is actually convert our current static template, the index.html that our designer made, and render that dynamically within Express. So let's do that real quick. What I'm going to do is I'm going to move. Why is my prompt taking that long? That's weird. Okay. So I'm going to move my public index.html into the cloud, views, let's call it home.ejs. Then I'm going to go back to my endpoint, the dummy endpoint I had. Instead, I'm going to change it to suit my needs. I'm going to change the root of this to render that template. So I'm going to take away hello, and then I'll just render home. And I don't need the rest of that for now. Now, as you can see, it picks up the changes and deploys it automatically. What do I expect here? Well, I expect nothing to change, really. So if I go back here, same thing. But instead, now this template is actually dynamically generated from the Express app. So let's work on that form now. Let's go into that view, home.ejs, and let's add that form. So I'm going to go to the right column here. What I'm going to do is make this form post to a send email endpoint. We haven't made this endpoint yet, but we will, with the method being post. I'll make an input, type text, and I'll name it email. That'll be the parameter name in which it goes up to the server. And I'll do a little placeholder so users will know what they need to enter there. Then I'll make a button, submit button. Always good practice to do that. OK, so basically this template has been saved, so it should have been sent up. Oh, actually, yes, do a call to action. Be bad if users don't know why they're entering the email. So get notified when we release. Oh, yeah. And then we close the form. Thanks, Matt. OK, give it a few seconds. Let's go back. Great. So we have a nice little form here now. We can put an email address. Let's put mine. Of course, this is not going to work, right? How is it going to work? We didn't actually specify this endpoint. But basically, as you can see, it's trying to post that data to send an email. So let's work on that endpoint now. Go back to my app.js. In this case, I want to specify that I want to handle post requests to the send email endpoint. Again, I want to specify my middleware. And what do we want to do here? Just for verification purposes, let's just send back down the email address I sent. So in this case, we can set email address. I can capture that from the request. In this case, we use something called the body, which will basically take the post parameters and parse it out for me. In this case, it was email, because I specified that in the form. And then let me just mirror that back down the pipe so I make sure that works. OK, save that. Go back, refresh this page. OK, let's test this out. Great, so it's working. So the email's going back up to the server. It's being pushed back down. Now, what do we really want to do? We want to save this email into our Parse database, right? So let's work on that. Now, here's where the magic happens. Your Parse, the Parse JavaScript SDK is embedded here with your keys already. So basically, we can new up a new class of a Parse object. And if you use our iOS SDK, this is pretty similar, except it's in JavaScript land. In the class, we can call it email. Then we can new up a new object of that class. And then we call email address. Basically putting that as one of the values of the keys email. Then we save it. And basically we want to pass in two functions, one to handle the success case. And in that case, let's do the same thing. Let's basically send that back down the pipe. And if there's an error, well, we'll give a nice error message. We can always refine this later. Oops, something went wrong. Let's add the error. OK, great. So now we should actually be saving this email into our Parse database. So let's go back. James@parse.com. Should be expecting the same thing. But now let's go back to our data browser. And as you can see, why are there 2 emails? Oh, somebody. I know what happened. Okay. Somebody who knows this app is already like, yeah, okay. But anyway, we see my email being placed in there. I knew if audience this size, someone would do something. Okay, so basically but what's being returned here is not that great of a user experience, right? What we really want to do is to render the same template down, but with maybe some notification that the user has put in their email address correctly. And what we can do here is just do that, right? So we can let's delete this line. .render home. But in this case, we want to send out a message, right? So let's send down message like, yeah, thanks. We'll contact you. Okay, but our template doesn't currently know how to even handle that, right? There's no place in there. So what we can do is go back to that template, home.ejs, and respond accordingly if there is a local variable called message. So you can do that by checking locals. Notice I'm just basically putting in JavaScript here. I'll just render message, a nice little H2. Else, basically show the form. So in the first case, they'll see the form, and then basically they will see the message after. So if all goes well, let's put in our email address again, at parse.com. Great, so that template gets rendered back down the pipe, but except now with an arbitrary message that we inject. So you can take this further, right? You can now, you should be able to maybe show the number of users that are in the queue that are waiting ahead of you. You can even email the users immediately once they actually sign up for your app, saying things about like what you're when you're actually be launching. And once you actually launch, you actually create a whole web app that's a companion to your mobile app. Okay, so let me go back to non-mirroring now. Arrangement. Go back to Keynote. Okay. Okay. So what else can you actually do? So you can make full-blown web apps. This is on? Okay. Another useful case is making admin interfaces. So you can easily make a web admin interface for your mobile app to administrate the data that you have. You can write arbitrary webhooks with this. You can respond to basically other APIs calling your web server with data. Maybe this is like a callback from Stripe, for example. And you can use the cloud modules that Matt talked about. You can send emails, you send texts, you can charge credit cards. And of course, there's a lot more to actually learn. So you can go to our Cloud Code Guide and also expressjs.com to learn more about the web framework that we've used. And we have 2 full sample applications. AnyMeme, which is a meme generator. It's actually anymeme.org. And it's all open source. And AnyBlog, which is a blogging platform that we built on Parse hosting. And this code will also be live on our GitHub as well, along with the presentation. Of course, we have a whole cadre of other sample apps as well. Geolocation app, AnyPic, as we've shown you today, basically is an Instagram clone, a whole store app, and various other things. And that's it. So go forth and make web apps. Yes, Pete.
don't you repeat his question?
Yeah, so the question is, can you actually use the JavaScript SDK in other environments like Node.js? And yes, you can. So you can actually import our JavaScript SDK. You use Node as basically an interface into your parse data as well. Of course, you can use the JavaScript SDK in the client, in the browser. So I could have built this demo as basically a one-page app with JavaScript as well. It just depends on what your preferences are.
So does that mean I can test my app locally? So my site, or do I have to deploy to be able to see my site?
So the question is, can you test locally? So for this, you have to be able to deploy to actually see the changes.
Because of the storage APIs?
Yeah, and also it's being served from there, right? But if you're making it basically a client-side only web app, you can just develop locally. Yeah.
Right here.
Yes?
Hi, very nice. Quick question. For all of those Express-based applications that are already out there without Parse, to migrate, do they just need to do that? It looked like it was only that one require statement, and of course their data would be separate. Is it that simple?
Yeah, so the migration for Express apps will depend. There are some apps that will easily, you can just get rid of few require statements, get rid of, you don't have to specify the port in your listening and various other things. One thing is we don't support all Node modules because, for example, we don't let you get access to the file APIs and various other things. But for a majority of those cases, web apps, you can actually just straight port them over.
The other thing is, how would you compare Parse with Meteor?
Oh, so that's an interesting question. So I think Parse is definitely much more mobile first than Meteor. Because we have such great clients in all the major mobile frameworks, it makes a lot of sense to just start using us, I think, for mobile stuff. Meteor is pretty good at real time. So if you need basically that kind of socket-based stuff, Meteor is a good choice.
Hi. First question is, do you support cron jobs? And second question is, how do you compare with StackMob?
So what's the first question, cron jobs?
Yeah.
Okay, so stay tuned. But this is something that we're working on. Right now, if you want cron jobs, usually you have to get your own server up and running or just ping our server somehow. There's also like other services like Iron.io or even Google. Actually, Google, I think there's like a specific Google code that you can use to run cron jobs periodically as well. Oh, and StackMob. So I think that StackMob and Parse bring a lot of similar kinds of functionality to the table. I think in general, like Parse is a little bit more mature, but basically go and take a look at both of them, see which one you like.
Where is the download for the command line thing? I just looked up, I couldn't find the command line.
Oh, it's at the top of the Cloud Code guide. It'll
Cloud
be
Code guide.
installed the command line interface.
Okay.
Yeah.
Second question is about file upload. Will I be
Yes.
able to upload files?
Yes.
Okay.
So does Parse support offline data sync?
So we do have basically downstream caching, but offline data syncing, we don't currently have that solution. So you would have to basically store, let's say like a core data, manage those objects going back and forth. And there are some third-party libraries out there that do manage that for you.
And second question, do we own all the data on the server, or
I'm sorry, what was the question?
do we own all the data? Do you?
Yes,
does
you
Parse-
own all the data.
And does Parse do anything with the data, or?
No.
Okay.
Your data is your data.
Okay, cool. And third question, I saw we have created a folder on your local machine, and how does that work in the team environment if we have the version control and you have two different developers to work with on the same folder? And
I'm sorry, repeat your question?
so you have to create a folder on your development machine, and you have to sync that folder to the server.
Mm-hmm.
So, say if in the team environment, what's the suggested process for that?
So we're not Git, and we don't want to be a distributed source control. Basically, we suggest that you work with your team using Git. is part of your workflow. So you should
Version control the same folder, or we have
Version
to
control-
deploy to that folder?
Or you should version control that entire folder if you're working in a team. Yeah. But you can specify the deploy endpoint to be different Parse apps. So if you guys are, don't want to stomp on each other's code in development mode, you can do that.
One more.
Hi. Do you guys support, or actually, do you guys require username and password for your users? Or can you upload users using perhaps an Apple ID instead to identify them?
So we don't require that you have username and password. You can use Facebook or Twitter, and we also have anonymous users. Basically, shell users that don't necessarily know their password that can be fully qualified later. I know you asked about Apple IDs. We don't support Apple like integration for their identity out of the box, but that is something you could also use Cloud Code to actually do. Okay. Well, if there's no more questions, one more. Yes, so the question was, can you debug Cloud Code? So there's a Parse log, which I didn't show, which will give you a stream of all the requests that are coming into your Cloud Code. Fortunately, I didn't make any errors, but if you did, we would have seen them actually with the line numbers. Yes, currently only by logging. Okay, thanks everyone.
So we're going to do a quick switch to ShowKit, and you have your machine here. So Matt Van Veenendaal is one of the founders of ShowKit, and are you the head of engineering?
CTO, yeah.
CTO. How many people saw the ShowKit SDK last month at the after party? How many people were at the after party? Okay, well, we have a lot of turnover every month. So good. We have something new for all the rest of you. Oh, I did that. Sorry. Bring it back. Sorry, that's my fault. There.
Arrangement first. So they're up.
How do you go full present?
We probably want. Is this okay with the resolution there? Because I'm going to be doing some stuff in Xcode as well.
So, okay, fine.
Just do scan. Cool.
Next month, we'll be looking at Android, actually. Greg Noodleman, who's spoken on design a few times in the past. About a year ago, Greg spoke to us at the StackMob offices, actually, in San Francisco. And Greg's got kind of a comparison of iOS and Android, and we're planning to look at that on the third Monday of August, tentatively at Udacity in Mountain View. You ready?
Yeah. I'm going to use this one.
Okay, great.
Hi guys. So I'm Matt from ShowKit. Firstly, I want to invite you guys afterwards. We're going to go to Antonio's Nut Bar if anyone wants to grab a beer. Come past and grab a beer. Secondly, none of this is under NDA, so feel free to share with your friends. Okay, so firstly, I want to introduce you to ShowKit. It's a way to enable real-time in your applications. The way we came about was we're actually making a telepresence application for doctors and patients to connect via video conference. And while creating that application and doing the video conferencing stuff, we realized that we had a lot more there. And kind of went towards that. So this is ShowKit. We enable video-to-video communication, voice-to-voice communication, screen sharing, remote gesture control, and of course, instant connectivity between two devices. That means that you can send messages from one device to another with a UDP socket that's all provided for you. So when you get into ShowKit, we actually have a similar thing like Parse. We have these things called subscribers. So you have a ShowKit account, and you can have many subscribers. What you do with these subscribers is they can make calls to each other. That call can be a video call. That call can be an audio call, could be screen sharing, and of course, it could be any of the instant operations that I just spoke about. So what I would like to show to you guys today is a couple of use cases that we've created for ShowKit, but it's one of the things that we have the biggest trouble with is creating cool ideas. We've seen some really cool ideas that developers have come up with on how to use this. So the first use case I want to show you guys is an app called Dates. It's your very simple video dating application. We've actually gone ahead and integrated this with Parse, which is very easy integration with ShowKit. We actually have a cloud code module that you can download and link your Parse users. So for the design of this application, we're going to store the users in Parse. We're going to use the ShowKit Parse module to create the subscribers for those users. And we're also going to query the users based on Parse. So for example, when we want to find a girl and we want to make sure that we don't find a guy, then we'll use Parse queries to make sure that the gender is correct. And then we're going to drop in the real-time audio video provided by ShowKit. So I'm going to show you guys a short demo of this, and I'm going to pull up the application in Xcode, and hopefully the resolution's not too bad. I know Xcode's a bit of a screen hog, so we can't see too much of it. But I'll run through a bit of the specifics about how you can drop it into drop ShowKit into your app. So firstly, this is a basic Parse app. You can see I have a Parse application and client key, and then we have a very simple sign up. And so in the sign up, it's just like you signed up with Parse, like the guys showed us just before, but one very big difference, and that's that we've added this cloud code. So what this cloud code does is that after a user is saved, we're going to create a subscriber. This ShowKit subscriber call is smart enough to realize if there's already been a subscriber created for that call, but this will help us later when we have a Parse user and we're able to call that user. So let's go back into the code and let's check out our view controller. So one of the things we're doing when we load the app is, let me show you the storyboards first, if we can even see them. A very, very basic UI. Obviously you can see I'm not a designer here. I don't have a great pretty UI, but it's a simple registration and then a simple login, and then we can use our UI view to create a call. So in our code here, we're actually going to log in, and you can see here we're using a very specific class to log in. We're not actually using the Parse login code, we're using this code called SHK Parse user. And that's a combination of the two codes. You can use, that means you can log in with Parse and ShowKit at the same time. So once we're logged in and we're ready to go, we'll have an interface where we can call the next user. And as you can see all this pretty Parse code here, we're doing our query, we're checking for the gender, and we're going to query the correct user, and then down here, we're using our SHK Parse user code again to initiate a call with that PF user. So what happens when a call is initiated? Somebody can answer it, somebody can reject it, it might time out, they might not be available. How do we find out about all that information? So we actually have a notification through Notification Center that's called, and that will call this method down here called connection state changed. And so from this, there's a few different strings you can handle. You can handle if a call's terminated. You can handle if it's actually got into a conference. And you can see here I can't spell very well here. And you can handle if it's logged in, disconnected, et cetera, et cetera. So let's try this out. So we have a quick application here, and we're going to do a quick registration process. I'm going to be a male looking for females, and let's sign up. Great. So once we've signed up, let's log in. And now you can see the camera. Hi guys. And we should be able to swipe to find a date. Now my colleague Emily is on this at the moment, so if you download the source code, you can probably have a chat with her. So we're starting a call now. And we just had to swipe left. Let's see. Trying to see where Emily is. I think she's back there. Can you see the screen, Emily? I can hear you. Let's try it again. Are you ready, Emily? So it's like a real dating app then. There we go. All right, cool. So Emily can see us. And we're all in there. And so it's pretty simple to embed this, and this is the video over the MiFi, so it's looking pretty good. Great. Swap this back. Okay. So that was the dates app. So if you guys want to check that out, you can download that over here at GitHub. And we also have a tutorial for how to build it on our website under the docs. So moving on. So the next app we want to build is a different designed app. It's a help desk app. And so this is useful if you want to do screen sharing and gesture control. And so what that means is in our use case, we're going to have two different apps actually using it. So you don't have to be tied to the exact same app to make a call between two apps. So one app's just going to be a very plain, easy app, which is using a UI view and that can accept calls and send gestures. That's it. The other app is going to be our sophisticated app that needs technical support in it. And what we'll be able to do there is we can drop in the screen sharing and gesture sharing into it and quickly and easily enable this. So firstly, one of the changes you'll need to do to enable screen sharing is to set your camera source to use the input device screen. And that's if you're using UIKit. If you're using OpenGL, we actually provide you with a custom GL context for you so that you can use that to screen share and it will be much more efficient. And then finally, to enable gesture sharing on them, one client needs to set their mode to gesture mode broadcast and the other one needs to set it to gesture mode receive. If you're in a call and each of these two set those in that order, then they're able to immediately send gestures from one device to another. So let's take a look at how that looks. So in this app, on the right here, we have an agent which is logging in, and they're going to be able to take and receive calls and see the person on the left screen. So what you can see right here is, on the left, the person is browsing through a couple of products in the Lowe's catalog and seeing what's up. So they've picked a product and they're looking at it, and in this application, they've implemented an agent button on the top right. So when the user has a question about a particular product, they can click on the agent button and then immediately talk to this agent here. So the agent can accept this call and see the other user's screen. Now these two people are talking to each other and they can see and control the screen and talk about either technical support or they can try and upsell the product to the particular person. So that's a cool demo, but let's see how it can be used in some of your applications. So one of the biggest applications we've seen for ShowKit is if you're publishing applications to clients and they're not on site and you don't know how they use the app, you want to see what they're doing, how they're producing a particular bug. Well, you can quickly embed ShowKit into your application and then see what they're doing on the app and talk them through it. This is great for testing bugs, testing usability, everything like that. So what I'm going to do now is show you guys a quick demo of how that works. So let's take a look at the next application, which is our ShowKit demo application with gesture control. And what we actually have in here is a different view for when we're actually in a gesture control. And you can see here, there's a few things we do. Firstly, we have this state called gesture capture local indicators on. And we'll see what that does in a minute. But what it actually does is puts a gesture icon on the screen for when anybody's touching it on either side. So if I'm remote controlling a screen, you can see a blue dot where my finger is. It can swipe, everything like that. So you can see what I'm doing. The next thing we're going to do is set the input device to screen, like I mentioned before, so we can show the screen. Then finally, I'm actually going to put the agent's video in our little preview view here, which is just a UI view. And you can set that to be the ShowKit main display, and that will display the other side's video in that view. So in this case, it's a tiny little view in the bottom corner, which you'll see in a moment. And then finally, we're going to set the gesture mode receive, which means that we can receive actions from other people. You can put this into a prompt in case you want to prompt people to say, hey, they're about to control your screen, or you can just do this and immediately get the control. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to demo this app with my colleague Anthony, who's just sitting up the front here. So let's build this. So the first thing we're doing here is we're going to look at an agent name. Now, what's your agent name, Anthony? James 3. So I think Anthony's actually stolen James's iPad for tonight. But let's give it a call. So the first thing we've done in this is, are you receiving the call? Cool. So we can see Anthony. We've got a basic video conference going on. You don't have to have the video conference going on. But let's jump into screen sharing. So immediately on Anthony's screen, he can actually see my screen. And if Anthony touches and swipes and changes it, I can see that on mine. So let's try it. So he's changed the background, and he's taking control of the entire screen. Cool. And you can still see, I'm not sure if you can see it here, but that preview display down the bottom here, you can still see Anthony over here. He's swiping at us. Cool. Anthony, do you want to show your side of it to the guys here? Check it under this thing. So Anthony's just got a video view at the moment of the other device, and he can swipe and change it and anything like that. So if you guys want to see a demo of this after, come and find Emily, myself, or Anthony, and we'll be happy to run you through it, and you can swipe and touch around. Cool. Awesome. So there's some of the more common use cases that we've gone through. Now, there's a whole bunch more. So we've seen people use ShowKit for game streaming. It's actually very, very performant on game streaming because we hook directly into the OpenGL context and we use the hardware accelerated encoding. And I can show you a quick video of that in a second. But we also use it for multiplayer functionality or any kind of real time where you want to send messages from one device to another instantly. We have an open UDP port and it's also cross-platform. So you could do a game that's on Android to iPhone and have them. So here's a demo of James. James is our lead developer at ShowKit. And this is when he was really excited and got 60 frames a second working with a little Cocos 2D application. So let's see how he goes. Skip through the first bit. So here's a little open source version of Fruit Ninja that he's playing. And the device at the back is actually showing a video stream of that exact game. And so he's going to play the game on his iPhone at the front, and he's going to swipe, and you can see that his actions are actually broadcast to the iPad. Cool. So that's about it. Does anyone have any questions about ShowKit? I think we're taking questions down the back.
Oh, so you're hooked in with Parse on your,
Yeah.
I saw in your documentation, but that's optional, right?
Yeah,
Or is that
absolutely.
the-
So The examples I showed today use Parse pretty heavily, but you don't have to use Parse. You can hook into your own in your own backend. We have a REST API that you can use to create subscribers, and you don't have to use Parse at all in the application.
But if you do want to use Parse, it looks very easy with iOS.
Yeah. So we have a complete integration with Parse. We have a cloud module so that you can put that on to create subscribers, and we also have that SHK Parse user class that allows you to do everything fully integrated. Cool. Oh, sure.
Hi, you started by saying that you did doctor-patient communication, or that's what you started with. I was wondering if you have HIPAA compliance.
Sure. So all of the stuff in our API is fully encrypted. So all the signaling traffic is encrypted, and all of the actual data from one to another is encrypted, and therefore we can be built into HIPAA compliant apps. There's many ways that you can do it for HIPAA compliance, but yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thanks.
Cool. I think that's it.
Great, thanks.
Cool. Thank you, everybody.
So all that video chat, that's all private, everything.
Yes, actually, the dating app is all private.
That too, yeah. Okay, all right, thanks. Do we have anybody who wants to make any announcements? Anyone hiring app developers that wants to announce that? Why don't you come up quickly and we'll do that. And it's we have some time. It's 8:30, so we have time for a few announcements. And there may be some pizza left. I'm not sure. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Amit Patel. Looking for an iOS software engineer to work on our turn-by-turn navigation application at Telenav called Scout. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Steve Lorenz. I'm starting a nonprofit. It's going to be a global photo app, and I need iOS and Droid developers if you want to volunteer. And we're literally going to save lives. I'll leave it there for that. It's 408-482-9534 or losgatosfriend@gmail.com. Thanks.
Okay, all right. So I guess that's it for this evening. Thanks for coming. And watch for news about our August meetup. Thanks.
These hands are meant to hold.